Hey, my friend, how's it going? So today is Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. I'm actually pulling up the Stronghold Digital Mining shareholder dashboard, which is now located at sdig.ziner.com. I'm interested in seeing what grid prices are like. And yeah, so over in the PJM PP&L zone of the grid, grid prices are at about $120 plus as of right now, a little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And over in PJM Penelec, right, which is the zone of the grid serviced by Scrubgrass, grid prices are currently $57.07. So I suspect, I'm going to take a look at the recent history. I suspect that we are going to indeed, and yep, we're seeing some elevated grid prices beginning to take hold in PJM PP&L, which is, of course, the zone of the grid that I happen to live in. And so I suspect, similar to yesterday, we're going to have some, as I like to say, grids gone wild, right? We're going to get some really good pricing there. Bitcoin itself is at around $57,000, $600 a coin, right? So 57.6. The network hash rate is about 559, and hash prices are just under 5 cents, which, again, from my perspective, is not optimal. With all of that said, what's even perhaps less optimal, and this brings us to the third potentially uncomfortable truth about Stronghold Digital Mining, is that, we've got this $250 million shelf registration that's pending with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, as the company clarified, right, via Twitter, hey, it doesn't mean, right, that we're going to use all of this money. It doesn't mean that we would use it all in 1 year. In fact, I think it's even potentially spaced out over 3 years. But the issue still remains, like potentially $250 million worth of, be it stock, be it warrants, whatever the permutation of security might happen to be. And right now, our market cap is about $73 million. So understandably, right, at the time this all came to light, the stock price got absolutely pummeled. It pretty much drove us down to our 52-week low of the year, which was about $1.65 per share. I remember those days very clearly, to say the least. And at the time, as I said, more or less, is like, hey, okay, to the extent you even decide to raise half of that amount, right? Say you only raise 100 million out of a potential 250 million. You really have to have, right? We need to communicate an exceptionally compelling reason for why we are seeking to raise that kind of money. And it has to be something like, we're going to be mining Bitcoin on Mars. Hey man, we just figured out how to turn an old ASIC into like a brand new one. There has to be something incredibly compelling, incredibly growth oriented. Hey, we're acquiring another power asset. Now, our co-founder, chairman, and chief executive officer, Mr. Greg Beard, he recently appeared on a podcast, and there was a lot of interesting things shared on that podcast. And one of the things, I'm paraphrasing, that Greg mentioned was, hey, when we look towards the future and we think about growth and opportunities for expansion, I'm paraphrasing, hey, we're sort of looking right here at home, meaning look at the land that we already have, look at the power output, right, that we already have, as well as potentially more power that we could presumably pull from the grid, right? If I'm not mistaken, I think it was hypothesized, not in this podcast, but rather via a communication on the X social media platform, that we as a company could essentially have, I think, upwards of around 400 megawatts. Please fact check me on this. Roughly 400 megawatts of like data center infrastructure. So presumably, right, given the fact that we can only produce about 165 megawatts of nameplate electrical capacity, clearly a good portion of that extra electricity that would be needed to power those data centers, or rather to power that extra, megawatts of data center capacity, would have to come from somewhere else. Presumably a fixed power purchase agreement from the grid or something else, right? The point being, though, that with a $73 million market cap, a stock price that's about $3.60 at the time this broadcast is being created, I mean, I don't even know that we can push $100 million into the market. If we were to say, hey, we're going to open up a $100 million ATM, I mean, I don't know that our stock, just based on the volume alone, it doesn't seem like a plausible solution, right? So the third uncomfortable truth is, yes, we're looking potentially at a pretty big equity raise or some other permutation of security, being sold and money being generated as a result of selling those securities. And then the question is, okay, what do we do with that money? And something else. And by the way, I'm going to do an entire broadcast to sort of talk about some of the things that Greg discussed in this recent podcast, which, by the way, I shared on X. So if you don't follow me on X, please do so. Check it out. I did link to it there. Again, excellent interview. But, when you sort of hear it, and Greg, I think, made an excellent point. He said, hey, most of our shareholders, right, meaning Stronghold Digital Mining shareholders, are bullish on Bitcoin. And you know what? I agree with Greg's assessment. I think, the overwhelming majority of individuals and institutions who might choose to take a position in Stronghold Digital Mining stock ostensibly are saying that we are bullish on Bitcoin. But I'll tell you something. I think being bullish on Bitcoin might mean something different than being bullish on the process of Bitcoin mining. Year to date, well, I shouldn't say year to date, but rather as of December 31st, 2023, in our 10K, I believe we published an accumulated deficit of something like $331 million. Now, I'm not going to get into the accounting mechanics of how that's computed, but suffice it to say that we've spent as a company a lot of money to refurbish our power assets, to build our data centers, and to fill those data centers with state-of-the-art Bitcoin mining equipment, which, as we know all too well, very rapidly depreciates to zero. I wonder if we might not be better off as a company simply raising money to the extent we're able to raise money and just buy Bitcoin and establish a treasury strategy of sorts simply by going into the open market, buying the Bitcoin, holding it on our balance sheet. I mention this because in that same podcast, Greg is asked, hey, what kind of treasury strategy, if any, does Stronghold Digital Mining have? And Greg, I think very accurately and I think, hey, very reasonably points out, we batch our Bitcoin and we sell it because we need to pay bills in fiat. And it would be great to maybe hodl Bitcoin. That would be awesome in some ways, right? If one is a long-term believer in Bitcoin. But we as a company are still not yet at a point where we can cover all of our expenses, right, with the Bitcoin we mine and have some Bitcoin left over to hold on the balance sheet. So the idea of potentially spending even more tens upon tens upon tens of millions of dollars on new and improved Bitcoin mining machines, as potentially lucrative of an ROI as it may be, when analyzed very, very narrowly from the perspective of our cost of power, our net cost of power at both Scrubgrass and at Panther Creek, if one were to zoom out a bit, though, and look at our overall cost profile, right? Are we even, like, does it make sense to still do that? Like, right? Like, I mean, if we can't cover all of our costs, not just our net cost of power, but like everything, then maybe we need to sort of rethink our strategy going forward. Now, Greg also mentioned something I think very, very, I love this phrase, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but in so many words, he said, hey, I want to try to profit from or benefit from the competition that exists amongst major hyper-capitalized companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Meta, etc. Hey, they're all competing to build out all kinds of, high-performance computing infrastructure for AI, machine learning, whatever the case may be. Hey, it would be great to be a beneficiary of that. And I wonder if that same logic cannot potentially extend to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. Can we as a company potentially be beneficiaries of this, real aggressive push that exists to want to get into the mining business right? That a lot of other companies, individuals, they all want to, mine Bitcoin. Can we potentially reposition ourselves a little bit to be the beneficiaries of that? And yes, of course, in a world where Bitcoin is making new highs every month, in a world where the, hash prices are just kind of going straight up, yes, I agree. 1,000% I agree. It makes mathematical sense to just own all of your Bitcoin mining equipment and keep all that profit for yourself. And yes, in a theoretical world, that is the most optimal solution. And it's the best course of action. And I would support that wholeheartedly. We, I think, as a company, have been maybe sobered up a bit over the past couple of years, where we've had to endure the brutal cold of crypto winters, where we've had to deal with going into the forward market, buying all kinds of, Bitcoin mining equipment, running the risk of not getting that equipment delivered on time, if ever at all, having to go into the spot market, maybe getting better deals there. It can become very, very challenging to make things work in an environment where Bitcoin simply isn't continually going up in price and hash prices aren't continually going up in value as well. So I pray and hope that I always get flack for, sticking up for our management team, but I'll never shy away from doing that, because ultimately, a guy like Greg, he's a co-founder of this business. This business wouldn't even exist if Greg hadn't shown an interest to want to get involved. And, listen, what would be the alternative? Greg quits tomorrow, right? What then? You think the stock price is sort of on thin ice now? Imagine having a leadership vacuum. Sure, with perfect hindsight, right? All of us can, right? Even management itself could go back in time and say, hey, yeah, we do this differently, we do that differently. We can't live in that type of rumination. It's not mentally or emotionally healthy for anyone to ruminate about stuff like that. We need to focus on where we're at right now and where we want to go tomorrow. So from my perspective, it's absolutely critical, and I pray and I hope that management is taking all of these data points into consideration. Right? Hey, if we're bullish on Bitcoin, then maybe we should figure out a way to just buy the darn Bitcoin and hold it on our balance sheet. Help others mine for Bitcoin, others who may be, if you're Canaan, okay, I'm going to pick on Canaan for a second here. I like Canaan. Company that first came out with an ASIC. I have a tremendous amount of respect for ASIC, for not just ASICs, but for Canaan. Part of, and I don't really follow the company that well, but I believe a part of their business strategy is to simply say, hey man, we're making these machines. Why the hell are we selling them when we can use them ourselves to mine the damn Bitcoin? Pretty ingenious, right? So, hey, what if we teamed up with a company like Canaan and say, hey, you guys need places to plug in your machines? let's work out a deal, you know? We can provide the data center capacity for these machines to be plugged in. It's a win for you, could be a win for us, right? There has to be economic value for both parties. You know, in the world of high performance computing, sure, hey, to the extent that we could create data centers that are clean enough. Remember, our data centers are in mine waste to energy facility areas, you know, kind of dusty, can get kind of, you know, right? It's not exactly a clean room, but maybe for HPC purposes, we need to maybe create stuff that's a bit more of a clean room. So be it, right? If that's the path we're going to take. But the point is, maybe we can facilitate other people doing what they want to do with data center infrastructure that we can essentially own, with energy assets that we own, that we control, that we provide electricity to these data centers for, right? We generate revenue from selling carbon credits, right? Because we generate beneficial use ash as part of our mine waste to energy operations. That could be a source of revenue. We've talked about this. So, you know, instead of maybe being so committed to the idea that we're going to just buy all of our own Bitcoin mining equipment, own it ourselves, and hope for the best in terms of like hash prices, maybe it's time to rethink that. Again, absent an environment in which Bitcoin continues to go up, hash prices are going up, because in that environment, yeah, it does make sense to just own everything yourself, keep all the profit for yourself, and ride happily into the sunset. As we've learned, that's not quite the world we live in. So, bottom line, we are looking at a potentially very uncomfortable truth, which is we may be raising a lot of money. Maybe not 250 million, but hell, even 50 million represents a significant portion of our current market cap. So that's something that needs to be grappled with. We need to talk about it. We have talked about it. Okay? I think it's healthy to talk about these things. I think it's healthy and important to have this type of dialogue. And I pray and trust that this type of dialogue is happening in New York City, right? At our corporate headquarters there, that it's happening out in Pittsburgh, that it's happening really, you know, amongst all of us who care about, you know, the mission and purpose of this business, because we're sort of getting close to what I believe may be an inflection point where, hey, are we going to roll the dice, raise a bunch of money, buy a bunch of new Bitcoin mining machines, get back on that hamster wheel of having to like figure out how to like, all right, how do we make this work? Or maybe we just say, hey, we buy a bunch of Bitcoin, we hold it on our balance sheet, we turn our data centers into these opportunity zones of sorts for others to be able to profit from whatever they want to do, be it high power computing or, you know, Bitcoin mining or whatever the case may be. We have a carbon capture project that's amazingly healthy and good for the environment, right? We provide carbon capture credits that others can invest in, which is a phenomenal thing for them, for us, for the environment. And maybe slowly but surely we can kind of put together a strategy that helps us as a company thrive and prosper in all seasons, not just during a crypto summer or in a world where Bitcoin just continues to go up indefinitely, as do hash prices. Okay, my friend, I hope you're having a good day. It's still swelteringly hot here in Eastern Pennsylvania. I believe the so-called real feel temperature will be about 100 degrees, like right around now. So that takes actual temperature plus humidity into account. And that's why I think we're seeing grid prices be quite as elevated as they are. And I'm looking just one last quick time here. Okay, we're up over $200 in PJM PP&L, which is the portion of the grid that I'm living in. And finally, PJM Penelec is now at roughly $30 a megawatt. So aside from the most efficient Bitcoin mining machines still running, I think the vast majority of electricity is going to be going to the grid. And that, of course, assumes that Scrubgrass is actually up and running again to be able to sell electricity into the grid, which I'd imagine it probably is at this point. Okay, my friend, let's stay positive, let's be great, and we will see each other again tomorrow.